Student agency, learner autonomy, ownership of learning, self-directed learning. Fellow teachers, we've heard these buzzwords over and over again. In today's video, in this series on pedagogy, we're going to talk about how we can stop just talking about them and start really implementing them in our classrooms and our schools. Now, the inverted or flipped classroom is one of the pillars of the blended learning model at both Louisenlund and at NLS. Most of us teachers and many students are already familiar with the concept of the flipped classroom. That means, of course, that what we used to do in class, we do at home, usually in an online format, and vice versa. But the inverted classroom model at NLS and at Louisenlund is not exactly the same. It's an enhanced version of this flipped classroom model. You see, because in the flipped classroom model, students are doing what they used to do in class at home, but unsupervised. You see, at NLS and at Louisenlund, we don't leave students alone in the home phase of the flipped classroom. In fact, we've transferred the locus of the asynchronous or online phases of learning from home back to our schools. For example, in our learning studios, in our labs, in our maker spaces, in our art studios, and in our library. That means in the online learning phases, where students are acting autonomously, where they are self-directed, which in the flipped classroom typically takes place unsupervised at home, our students are at school, in conducive learning spaces and with teacher support. In fact, at NLS and at Louisenlund, we aim to have a balance of teachers from across subject areas present in our learning studios to support students during these online phases of learning. In Louisenlund pedagogy, such scaffolds, such support are fundamental and constant throughout all learning experiences. We never leave our students to figure it out completely on their own, but we do give them enough space and autonomy to develop independence, confidence, and initiative. Now, let's examine this inverted classroom model in greater detail, including the 6 phases that are a part of it. A learning sequence always starts with a unit introduction in this model, and that is face-to-face and in the classroom. Now, at the beginning of any unit, it's important to make sure that certain elements are clear to students. For example, what are our learning goals or aims for the unit? How will we know if we've achieved those goals? By what criteria will our learning be assessed? What is our main line of inquiry, or some of those key questions that we want to explore? What are some of the big ideas or concepts that we want students to master by the end of the unit, and in what contexts? And lastly, and what are the resources that we need to get there? For example, what are the texts, the tools, and the topics that we'll need to ensure that we reach those goals? All of these elements are addressed directly in the unit introduction, which tends to be the only one of the 6 phases that is somewhat teacher-centered. This gives students a firm foundation upon which to build as they pursue their lines of inquiry. Now, I'd like to pause here for a moment to emphasize the importance of inquiry. All learning begins with questions, and the better the questions, quite frankly, the better the outcomes. Part of effective teaching involves modeling good inquiry questions for students, and over time, helping them to ask their own good questions. Secondly, to scaffold or support inquiry effectively, we have to coach students on the ways to best pursue answers to those questions, and also to provide them with the resources and the tasks to do so. That brings us to the second stage of the inverted classroom model, the knowledge acquisition phase. The knowledge acquisition phase in the inverted classroom model used to take place in the classroom in a mostly teacher-centered format. Now, most of us remember it from our school days. The teacher stands at the front, fills the chalkboard or the slides on the overhead projector or the smartboard with notes and presents that content, which includes definitions, key terms, and some basic concepts. Now, most of that content is on a level that we could understand it by reading a text or by watching a video without necessarily needing the presence of an expert like a teacher. In fact, we would say that in Bloom's taxonomy, this is on the lower echelons of the phases or stages of learning, the remember and understand phase. Now, because most of the content and concepts at this stage of learning doesn't require more complex levels of cognition, we have moved this phase from the classroom into the learning studios in an asynchronous or online phase that we call studio time. This has an added benefit in terms of the time, the path, and the pace of student learning. For example, some students are quicker or stronger than others in a certain subject area or topic area, and therefore they can grasp content in one go. Whereas other students will need more time to reread texts or to rewind and rewatch video clips in order to grasp that content, or maybe to do another practice of those problems to master a certain skill set. However, in the traditional classroom, where the knowledge acquisition phase takes place face-to-face, and the teacher delivers that content, the pacing is the same for all students, making that kind of differentiation and personalization very difficult to impossible. Our blended learning model, by contrast, allows learners to work at their own pace and in their own way. Most of this learning takes place on our LMS, or Learning Management System, which at our schools is managed back, and also with some other digital learning tools. The key is that expert teachers have already created a well-constructed unit and tasks that scaffold learners' acquisition of knowledge and skills on a basic level. You'll find all of this, including the resources, on the LMS. Now, you might object that during this knowledge acquisition phase, learners are going to have important questions about the content and the concepts that they're trying to master, and therefore that completing this phase outside of the classroom in a purely online environment has a great disadvantage. And quite frankly, we agree with you completely. That's why we have our students complete this phase not at home and not simply online, but in our learning studios and with teacher support. Now, what's key here is that students exercise control in studio time over what they're doing and how they approach it, and that the teachers are in a more supportive or coaching role. Third phase is the mastery test or some other form of mastery assessment, which is usually formative. Now, the mastery test is also done online and asynchronously, except that students generally need to complete it before they come to their next class. The mastery test is usually a short multiple choice or fill in the blank test, but it also can take other forms, such as uploading notes or completing a short worksheet. The mastery test is designed to check that students have achieved a certain level of mastery of basic knowledge and skills. Once learners complete this, they and their teachers have a benchmark. They know where they stand in this particular phase of the learning sequence. This also adds another layer of accountability to these asynchronous online learning phases in studio time. And additionally, it allows teachers to have the data that they need in order to plan their lessons effectively, differentiating for the different levels and needs of their students. Now, at NLS and at Louisenlund, we call classes or lessons seminars. It is in the seminar that students deepen their knowledge and understanding of course content and concepts, and also further develop their skills. This is in the middle tier of Bloom's taxonomy, the analyze and apply phases of learning. This is the phase of the inverted classroom model in which we think it's most important for students to be in the presence of their specific subject teachers, because it involves a solidification and a deepening of the things that they learned in the knowledge acquisition phase, adding a new layer and level of complexity to their learning. Having the subject teacher, an expert in their field present, allows students in a face-to-face setting to ask more complex questions and help them attain to their desired level of conceptual understanding and skill mastery. Refer to my video on cooperative learning to understand more about the framework of these settings and how an actual lesson at NLS looks. In the transfer phase, phase 5, students apply what they've learned to new contexts. They return to the learning studio or to other creative spaces to design, to create, and to evaluate. This comprises the upper echelons of Bloom's taxonomy, taking learning to the next level. Now comes the main evaluation phase, in which students have the opportunity to demonstrate their learning and their mastery of concepts and skills. This is the summative assessment phase. Now, the summative assessment can take a variety of forms. It can be performance-based assessment, or more conventional written examinations, or even e-assessments. The critical component is that the assessment should be as authentic as possible and give students a personalized opportunity to best demonstrate their learning. In designing such assessments, teachers, in a spirit of the universal design for learning, should take into account that learners are different and that they show their learning in different ways. Therefore, some variety in the mode of assessment and some voice and choice for students in these summative assessments is critical. In closing out the learning sequence, we recommend that teachers add some sort of metacognitive element after the summative assessment to ensure that learners look back over the unit in terms of the major takeaways, both on the metacognitive and the cognitive level. For example, what have I learned in terms of content, concepts, and skills? But also, what have I mastered in terms of strategy? And what are my major takeaways about the learning process itself and how it can be optimized in the future? For more information, please check out my video to be released soon on metacognition and reflective learning. Once you've finished the learning sequence, the inquiry cycle in the inverted classroom model starts all over again with a new unit and a new unit introduction. Just as in life, we never stop learning through different experiences and through our discovery of the world around us, so too in our school. Answers to questions lead to new questions, new lines of inquiry, and new opportunities for discovery, remembering always that we learn not for school, but for life. We'll see you next time.